Good evening, Truth Foragers, our fellow Truth Foragers, and welcome to this evening's Truth Foragers, the number one hit. I'm going for it. Number one hit uh, urban legend podcast since 2023.
Mm.
Of course, a lot of you will think, "What do you mean since 2023?" But as uh, as those of us in the know, it is actually 2026 this year. It's just that the world governments have been running a big conspiracy about the year. We did actually lose 3 more years
Mm.
in the. But when was it? It was in the early 21st century, wasn't it, Rick? That the 3 years were
Yeah,
lost.
yeah. It's happened in two phases, I think. It's hard to track, of course, because obviously sources are contentious on the subject. But yeah, there was a big one around the millennium, right at the beginning, and then of course part of the shutdowns with COVID were another time slip.
Wow, people said they were losing track of time, of
Mm.
course, and weeks were months, and so on and so on. And that's exactly where they slipped in. A good 5 months, I would say.
Yeah, about that. Yeah, yes. It's hard to know why these people do these things. I think it's just to feel like they're in control.
Mm. Well, control comes from knowledge, of course, as we all know. Knowledge is
Mm.
power. And here on the Truth Foragers, we look to give you the power back, our beloved snufflers. So, on that, thank you very much and welcome to this evening's Truth Foragers. It is a joy to be back on the one channel on Twitch that allows us to come into your houses. Thank you so much to the Boys and the Baltic staff for allowing us to stream yet again on their channel. Um, Rick,
They are courageous allies, actually, in the fight to get the truth out.
I believe you sent them a special present last week. I believe as a thank you.
I did, yes, homemade. In fact, I had constructed some um, hats for the winter with the tinfoil actually built into the inside of the design, so you can wear it without it being obvious that you're a truth forager.
And of course, tin foil in the winter keeps your head nice and toasty,
It does.
which cuts down on the electric bills. It's perfect, perfect. That's a thoughtful gift, Rick, and I'm sure that they will truly appreciate it. It's
Well,
a small sign of our thanks, isn't it? Really.
it is. I mean, I did catch their show last night, and none of them actually seemed to be wearing those hats. But even so, I mean, I'm sure they went down brilliantly with them.
Oh, absolutely. Well, who wouldn't? Let's face it. They seem like smart gentlemen. You'd think that they would have their ears to the ground, as it were.
Indeed, and tucked up under a hat.
Oh, oh, where they should be. Um, so yes, thank you again and welcome. Thank you to those in chat and watching this evening. We appreciate you, our snufflers. Um, as always, we hope that you've completed the relevant paperwork, that you feel secure and safe in our presence, and that you are happy, of course. Staying on the channel is you accepting that you are happy with us knowing your IP addresses, your addresses, last known photographs, blood types, and so on. It is, of course, for uh, your safety as much as ours, really. We have to be careful, of course, in these circles, that only the right people are in at any one time. So thank you so much for your patience and for joining us on this journey to find truth in a in the mire of confusion and lies and uncertainty. Uh, my name is Dickie Waghorn. I'm one of the hosts this evening, and it's an absolute delight to have with me my main man. I'm calling him my main man, Rick Bishop. How have you been, Rick, this past few days? You've been very busy, you said earlier.
I have. As you know, I'm one of those people who believes in a lot of the research side of what we do,
Mm.
and often that research can't be done from the comfort of your living room with a laptop, and you have to get out and get your fingers just a little bit covered in ink. And yes, so I've been hunting through some old newspaper archives and research institutions and places, most of which knew I was there at the time.
Wow, the most. That's quite a law-abiding week, it seems.
It is, yeah, yeah. Sometimes you do have to trespass, shall we say? No, obviously, no damage, but trespass in order to find the truth. But this week, yes, I was mostly invited, and really condescended to remarkably little.
I said, "How is your Trespassers for Truth group going? By the way, have you managed to gain any more members?"
We're losing members actually, not so much in terms of membership role, but more to the criminal justice system,
Hmm.
um, as increasing numbers are forced to sort of swear off the activities, which is a shame, I think, because there are real secrets to be unearthed if you're willing to get out there and dig. But when someone finds you on their land with a shovel, they tend to react poorly.
It is true, of course. Viewers, those of you that have subscribed for the last 6 months or so will have received a pamphlet, of course, on what you can disguise a shovel as. I think it was 52, 52 items you can disguise a shovel as. And
Mm.
hopefully that will be of use to some of you as you snuffle for your truth truffles, of course.
And you normally need more than one excuse because not everyone's going to believe it's a medically approved back brace when you first tell them that. Um, so it's important to be able to say when they doubt that it's in fact an unusually designed surfboard. Say,
Oh, I've used that one before.
mm.
It nearly worked actually. It was very good.
Yes, I stumbled over it once because I was 340 miles inland. Um, I really shouldn't have done that one there.
No, these things happen in the heat of the moment when you feel so close to a breakthrough in
Mm.
a long fought for urban mystery.
Yes,
Sometimes
it's true.
you can make a bad decision, I suppose.
It's an easy mistake to make. The adrenaline is pumping. It's easy and it's a shame. But as long as you're willing to then run, I think you're in good stead. So how about your week? How's it been?
My week's been very quiet. In fact, I spent the time in a darkened room,
Mm,
listening, uh,
I see.
mostly through the wall at my neighbours, and a little bit. I spent some time sat at an angle in my chair, looking through my heavily net curtained windows
Mm.
at the people across the road. There's definitely there's something there, and I'm getting closer. And you know when something's on the tip of your tongue, as it were, the tip of your brain, the breakthrough is just there.
Yes.
So yes, so it
Yeah.
felt like I needed a week at home. I took a week off my paid job, as it were, and thought this was the best way of spending my time.
Of course. Yes. I mean that actually does seem like a valid way to spend your time. And you heard anything interesting, exciting, anything that might be a lead, perhaps?
There's a lot around the number 41, which I believe you and I have discussed at the pub before. Um,
Indeed.
it seems to be popping up a lot recently, and I think that's something that people, our dear snufflers, should keep an eye on over the coming weeks, leading up to Christmas, especially. The number 41. Look for it in patterns. Look for it in any movies you watch, books you read, conversations you have. Maybe as you're shopping at Christmas, giving money to the big corporations, keep an eye out for 41. I think you'll find it will come up more often than expected.
Numbers can be powerful indicators of the unusual. I think we would all agree with that. Um, and they do seem to come and go in clusters, don't they? And you're right, 41 does seem to be very much prevalent at the moment, though recently I think it's on the decline a little, but we'll see. It's interesting.
Definitely so. Definitely so. But speaking of numbers, to quote the great De La Soul, tonight three is the magic number, for
Mm.
we have three urban myths and mysteries, urban legends to bring you, dear Snufflers. Uh, Rick and I have spent many hours poring over these three, going through history, going through old footage, newspapers, notes, letters, speaking to people face to face on phone calls, over the internet, old chat rooms once that only we sort of know about. Um, and I think we've got some very good information on these three, Rick. How confident are you feeling this evening that we can really impart some knowledge?
I, I'm pretty confident we will be able to open people's minds fairly generally on all three. But there's one I'm particularly excited about, which obviously we'll come to later. But I think that one's really going to surprise people.
Fantastic. Um, as always, dear Snufflers, we appreciate and encourage your questions and comments. If you have a question about one of our myths that we're talking about, please feel free to ask it in chat. If you know about this myth or mystery and have something to bring, please again comment on it and we can run off these points that you're making, these questions you're asking. Towards the end of each, we will ask the question of each other whether we believe or we remain skeptical. Rick and myself will give our final summary, but you, dear viewers, have the choice for 50 channel points, mere 50 channel points. You can choose to remain skeptical or you can choose to believe, and it will show. I guess it helps us to add up in chat to see what the overall view is, and then we can really get to the meat of things and see what people are thinking.
Yes, it's always interesting to see if we line up with what chat says. So we shall see.
Exactly. Well, I suppose we'd better get started. Let me just set up the first graphic, of course. It's always hard having to fight through someone else's OBS, but they're very generous to letting us take over part of their channel, of course.
It's very kind of them, and I think it's important to note that there is a lack of people who are willing to do such things. They should be commended.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, well, the first one tonight is our mystery from yesteryear. I do like starting early on the mystery from yesteryear. We like to have an urban mystery that maybe is from uh, decades, even hundreds of years in the past. This one is one that caught my attention a few years ago, the first time I heard of it. But I was busy at the time. I know that you, Rick, you were spending some time abroad, and you struggled to look at it at the time as well. But it just feels like recently our calendars have enabled us to spend a bit more time looking into the Welsh juggler.
Mm. Yes, it is an interesting one. In fact, this one was first brought to my attention by an Italian colleague when I was studying a while ago in Rome. And it seems bizarre that I would be presented with a case that's relatively close to home um, by someone in a country so far away. Not that Wales isn't also a foreign country; it's just geographically considerably nearer. The 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 simple basis behind the tale, as I originally heard it, and I was later to realise that this was just the tip of the iceberg, is there is apparently one of those remarkable numbers, a number that there are things in life that people say you can only do a certain number of, like the number of times you can fold a piece of paper in half, irrespective of its size, is 9 or something. It doesn't matter what kind of piece of paper you use. By the time you fold it in half 9 times, um, any piece of paper, no matter how thin and no matter how carefully you do it and how much you iron down the crease, is too stiff to complete a 10th fold. Um, So when you're confronted with a piece of information like that, you think, okay, um, it's not something I've ever tested, but I'm prepared to accept that there is perhaps a number that is built into the universe somehow. Well, with juggling, it turns out the number was 7. It is possible for people to juggle 7 things, and only 7 things, and that was the limit. And as the story was given to me originally, um, the idea was that there was this uh, story from medieval times of this famed Welsh juggler who was known to have been able to juggle 9 things, a feat that no human being has been able to accomplish before or since, as far as we know. It's on a scale of throwing your javelin through a dozen axe handles, or on returning from an odyssey. It's an almost unthinkable thing, and that was all I was told at the beginning. Did you hear the same thing, or was your take a little different?
For me, it was I delved much more into historical records. I know you had the conversation in Italy. I found it while I was one of my Sunday afternoon perusals, just through old law books, old records of the land, marriage and birth records, and so on and so forth. Um, Sales of land and of flocks of sheep, and in the middle there was a what caught my attention first of all was that someone had paid money um, for the performance of this gentleman, known only as, in modern translation, the Welsh juggler. This stood out a lot because this is not necessarily something that I ever see in this book. So as I say, it's normally for goods and such like. So it piqued my interest, as it would, and I looked into this gentleman, and he cropped up. As we often find, Rick, once you're looking for something, suddenly you can see it everywhere. It becomes obvious. He wasn't always known as the Welsh juggler. He was known as the Western performer, the showman of the valleys.
Mm.
There was, but once you start putting things together, you realise you see this pattern. And so for me, going through the paperwork showed me that this man was popping up across England at the time.
Right. Yeah. It is an interesting thing where you find an avenue which someone opens up to you. You see like a little chink of light, and then you discover when you go looking that a completely different approach has yielded something that leads to the same direction. It's quite compelling. It's quite exciting when that happens, because you can then follow that track back out again and perhaps see another side to the whole story. Now, obviously, these are for the most part old records, though the story seems to be one of those things which people still mention in terms of, oh yeah, my great grandfather saw him, or my great uncle saw him, even though the earliest records of this remarkable person date back 800 years. So you think this is a remarkable thing. I suppose it is possible we're talking about the same person who just has lived for 800 years. It is possible we're talking about a family of performers, perhaps, passing down a secret. And I do have to ask, why so secretive? If you have this remarkable talent, I mean, surely you'd be doing television shows and earning a great deal of money as the world's greatest juggler, would you not?
And I think that point you made was something that drew me into looking at that reason. Why not be more open? Why are there not more modern records of such a thing? And this is when I started looking through some old images. I was looking at images from the mostly the 1600s, I'd say. Very nice illuminations, from the
Hmm.
monks and such like. And there were images of a juggler, a gentleman juggler, performing in a salubrious surrounding.
Hmm.
Who appeared? He was drawn. It may be a mistake, of course, but monks would often restart a whole page if they made a mistake, which
Oh
made me
yes.
wonder. Um, but in these drawings, the man in question appeared to have 3 hands.
Yes. Yes. I must confess, I haven't seen the original of that image, though you were kind enough to send me
Mm.
a picture of it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's good to have a fax. We can get it very quickly to each other in that regard.
Absolutely, and I mean our entire work has been transformed by facsimile machines. You're
Absolutely.
absolutely right. Uh, the the truth is, I was particularly curious about that because when I first heard the legend about the third hand, I of course assumed it was figurative. You know, it was people saying that he moved his arms so quickly it was
Mm.
like he had a third hand. And yet here is a drawing, an image, and quite well rendered, truthfully, of a person with three arms, 3 hands. It is an astonishing thing. And that alone you would have thought would have been remarkable, even if the man had never been a juggler. Someone like that would have been quite noticeable then and now.
And for me, that is interesting. I kept looking through the pictures, and I found more on the so-called Welsh juggler. This time from the 1800s, a well-rendered pencil drawing in it was for a newspaper. It was a sketch that I don't think ever made it to a final newspaper, but it was found in the old records of a newspaper office. Someone found it there. A whole bundle of pictures of of hangings, of disease, of children, of the elderly, and so on and so forth. And in there was this juggler. Um, but although you did not see a third hand, there was definite drawn upon him a strapping, wearing almost like a sling, as if to hide an appendage.
Yes. Yeah. For those who are not familiar with this, it was common practice until relatively recently, perhaps with the advent of gory horror films, for people to photograph anything that was unusual or considered
Mm.
bizarre, or draw pictures of it, make etchings of it, to be passed around by the curious. When when there was very little to entertain you in the evenings, apart from slowly dying of diphtheria, people did tend to take a look at these pictures and see a view on the world that they would otherwise never have seen. Um, and those kind of images can often be interesting clues because these people, perhaps like primitive versions of ourselves, sought out the unusual. Um, I've found many clues in such collections, and that kind of contraption, while obviously unique to this individual, is not an uncommon way for people to get around without being seen in the way that they were. As we know, it was common practice for pirates in particular and seafarers back in the long ago to wear an eye patch to preserve the night vision of one of their eyes for when they went below deck into a darkened space. But as we also know, that era of time leads to an enormous expansion of people with the concept of the cursed eye, something that would have been immediately obvious to anyone walking past them in the street. So the fact that eye patches became commonly worn would have been an absolute boon to people with that particular condition.
Mm. Absolutely, and again, I looked in some of the papers at the time, in Victorian times, newspapers often advertised contraptions or medicines, clothing within the pages, of course, and I did manage to find certain strappings and such like for holding in the body, but I couldn't link it directly to the Welsh juggler. It appears that what he had in the image was custom built, and
Yes.
suggests um, this this was not just something to tighten the muscles or to provide a slimmer figure, but instead may indeed have been to hide an appendage, which again ties into the previous jugglers.
This was a time where the world was full of artisans and craftsmen who would construct pretty much anything you needed, from customized corsets for women to intricately designed pieces of equipment for almost any purpose you could imagine. Um, Before the advent of injection molding and these days, I suppose, 3D printing, the reality is you relied upon people with real expertise in traditional materials for these kinds of things. These were not uncommon, and plenty of them actually remain in the archives of museums. It can be a fascinating experience to go and look and see these rather remarkable contraptions. But I am still curious because while ultimately the Welsh juggler seems to be one of those stories that will be told forever and uh, appears generationally, it's always uh, someone 2 or 3 generations ago who saw him perform. It is fascinating to me that somewhere out there right now there is a performance going on where somebody is watching a 3-armed person juggle 9 separate objects all at once in order that their grandchild can, sometime down the line, recount this tale from family experience. How does one get invited to such a performance, I wonder?
I found, if talking about 3 generations, it might bring us as up to date, of course, as we can in this situation. Um, I look back at the time, it was towards the tail end of the freak show in the carnival,
Mm.
and there was talk of a Welsh juggler. I found a Welsh juggler in the freak show, but this would have been the person I spoke to. It was his grandfather. Again, the 3 generation. His grandfather that had seen the Welsh juggler in the freak show at the carnival. Um, but his grandfather's memories are unfortunately hazy, and he wasn't clear about whether he was there as a freak show because he had 3 arms or because he was Welsh.
Um, I mean, I think we can all agree that if you were to walk down a busy street in Wales today, relatively few of the people you would pass would have 3 arms. Um, I mean, technically, it is true that the average Welshman um, is essentially human in almost all respects, and and though I mean I have a greater than average number of arms, but that is 2, of course, not 3. Um, I've been to Wales on a number of occasions, and have yet to pass anyone with 3 arms. Though I suppose it is possible that there is something in the makeup of Welsh people that makes them see additional arms. Do you think that's a likelihood?
Please say that again. Sock Fiddler, our latest viewer, has been welcoming and been welcomed also into chats. What was your question, please, Rick? One more time.
I was asking, given that at least to the sort of casual glance, it
Hmm.
appears that Welshmen do not on average have three arms.
Hmm.
Is it possible that Welshmen see more arms?
I see more arms. Well, of course, Seymour Arms was a childhood friend of mine.
Ah, yes, of course.
I
Yes,
think,
you've mentioned him before.
yes. He was a splendid man. He's no longer with us, of course. A terrible accident. It never.
Mm.
But I think I looked at data from old censuses. Um, Although the government census asks certain questions, those in the know that there is often one of the pages. There's a page you can the right one you can sort of carefully peel apart for extra questions for those that know. And according to the answers that people answered there, um, the Welsh do indeed have a slightly higher average number of arms.
It's
I,
absolutely fascinating.
it's still below two, of course, but
Hmm.
by a couple of decimal places. Um,
Ah,
of course, that page has a lot of information that we use regularly when considering censuses. But
yes.
the arms one was fascinating to me, and it did make me wonder that perhaps there is this whole run of Welsh jugglers across history who were able to perform so well because of their third arm, whether it is through um, manuscripts, the monks' illuminations, whether it's through tales
Hmm.
of freak shows, uh, images in Victorian newspapers of strappings. I It definitely came to me as quite possible.
I do note an interesting correlation to another story that is possibly similar, given that one of our more long lasting and renowned lines of monarchs originated from Wales. The suggestion was that uh, the, the Tudors often sported an additional arm, and it was commonly known, even though it would have been considered wildly impolite to mention it. But this is commemorated, of course, to this day in all of the public houses with the name King's Arms.
Exactly, and of course, there's also it's not just arms in history. Of course, the the first lord of the Isle of Man was
Mm.
known for his three legs.
Exactly, and of course, this is an island that is extremely close to Wales, and it would be laughable to suggest that's not a connection.
Oh, draw lines, add up the numbers, Rick. You and I both know that
Mm.
there's no smoke without fire.
You have to be willing to do the mathematics sometimes.
Okay, so I think we've spoken enough about the Welsh juggler. Rick Bishop, do you believe that there is across history a series of Welsh jugglers able to juggle a larger number of items, perhaps due to a third arm?
Well, for me, we are talking about obscure local legends which are nonetheless founded in hundreds of different sources spanning generations, with thousands of tiny little pieces of evidence that correlate it to other parts of British history. Of course, it's completely plausible, I believe.
Um, I also believe, as I started skeptical, but as more and more papers and images showed these images, it's just there's too much evidence. It would be ridiculous. And for me, the thing that really put me over was the realization of that connection with the Isle of Man and the legs.
I, I, I tend to agree. Um, I've yet to find any connection intrinsically to westernness in the British Isles, or at least in the island of Great Britain, that implies an additional limb. But certainly the correlation is obvious if you look at it.
Of course, I've also heard that the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, people are known for six fingers.
Yes, yes. For those who don't know, Sheppey is a small island off the north coast of Kent. You can't normally go to live there, but you can be sentenced to it.
Exactly, exactly. Well, let's look in chat. Sock Fiddler believes in the Welsh juggler, partly because she has dated several three-armed Welshmen. Certainly, some images, if you could find photographic evidence of that, Rick and I would absolutely love to have that. And maybe we'll be able to expand our research out to perhaps more than jugglers. So
Mm.
it'll be fantastic.
It's certainly something worth looking into.
Well, a wonderful start heading back to history, and we're bringing it more up to date with our second tale. Rick, I'm just going to update the graphics so that we. Oh, I need a capital letter there. It would be wrong. It would be selling it short if I didn't include the capital letter. The second is a tale that I found. Uh, it's a darker tale, I suppose. Whereas the one before was more of a tale of interest, this is more a tale that some would say is spooky in parts. It is the tale of the dancer's reflection, Rick
Mm.
Bishop. Tell me somewhat about, introduce those that are watching, in fact, to the dancer's reflection.
It's a story that correlates to plenty of other similar tales. I think it um, is one of those things where when you first hear it, you might assume it is simply the same as many of the other reflection stories we've investigated. I think obviously in terms of the cat mirror and various others that we've looked into, which are quite well known, I'm sure, to our audience. The the dancer's reflection has a slight twist in the tale, though, doesn't it? Because it isn't merely the fact that a dancer in front of a mirror um, perceives that the reflection is in fact dancing um, much better than she or he in some cases is able, but there seems to be something else to it as well. And I think you actually uncovered the correlation that it's not just that the the reflection doesn't quite match what the dancer is doing.
No, this it ties into um, a base human fear ever since mirrors became known, and humans started seeing reflections of themselves for the first time. There
Mm,
was always the fear of a soul or soulless reflection, whether the reflection was truly you or from a different reality, whether it was another being altogether. Of course, in horror films, there are people who talk into mirrors, things come out of mirrors, things
mm,
change in mirrors. The reflection is different in mirrors, all terrifying concepts that are grounded in historical happenings, of course, Rick. You and I both know.
of course, and extremely common all over the world, I think.
Oh, definitely so. Um, and as you say, part of the dancer's reflection is that as the dancer dances and perceives their reflection as dancing better, there is that slight out of time, just enough. We're not talking seconds. In fact, often the most recognizable difference is a is a millisecond, less than a millisecond.
Mm,
Literally change. They also say that the eyes are very different. They can see a different uh, glint, a different look in the eye. Sometimes a different eye color altogether.
mm. Yes, that is notable, and in those cases where the accusation has been that the reflection and the dancer have in fact swapped places, and the the dancer that you actually see on stage is the original reflection. It is noted how often a change in eye color is identified by those who know them well.
Exactly, exactly. In any of your research into this, and this is a modern phenomenon, so there is video footage taken by the dancer and their
Mm.
friends. It's grainy, of course, pixelated often, um, hard to see at times. Um, but in your viewing of it, do you notice the difference in the eye, in the face, in the aura, I suppose, of the individual?
I think one of the things that is worth mentioning, I know this is a little bit of a digression, but it is perhaps worth mentioning just in case people are not familiar with this, because we've been doing this for a very long time. When you encounter footage that is um, out of focus, pixelated, grainy, looks like it has, arbitrary artifacts in it, like the film wasn't developed properly. What you tend to find in these cases is that is evidence of authenticity. Because if an image was captured flawlessly, it would imply very strongly to me that it was fabricated. In the real world, people don't take perfect photographs, particularly when under stress, when surprised, when confronted with something unusual. So it is very, very important to very important uh, to point out that quite often the lower the quality of the image, the more you can rely upon it. Um, yes, there are in fact a few instances where the footage has shown differences in eye color. Um, Obviously, when you take this evidence to people who specialize in these things, they have all sorts of explanations for how eye color changes depending on which camera settings are used to capture things, and how the stage was lit and all sorts of things like that. Um, but what they don't seem to be able to explain, in my experience, is when you look at the dancer and when you look at the reflection, there is clearly a very different um, sense about them. One of them is obviously profoundly afraid, and the other is not. And not everyone can see this, I know, but it is obvious to me, and I think you see it too, don't you?
I think very much so. The more you look at the grainy images, you do see a difference in confidence in the stance, the movements, the micro expressions in the face, of course.
Indeed.
it it's definitely something that stands out the more you look into it, and often it's the reflection that appears much more confident, that appears much more calm, I suppose, um, and much more focused in what it's doing. It's why every now and again, if you look, you do notice that the reflection, and it's only seen on a few. Um, there's times where the dancer has perhaps changed up her dance a little bit, and it's like the reflection is almost briefly caught out, as if it was doing
Mm.
the regular dance, of course. There's
Yes.
times where it starts to turn to one way and then catches up the other way, the face changes, and you do see a change in expression in the reflection at that time.
Mm. Yes, it is noticeable, and it is something that I think can be picked out. You're right; it does seem to happen at sudden moments when when the dancer, for example, makes a tiny error and the reflection doesn't. It doesn't catch it in
Mm.
the same way, and sometimes you need a real expert in dance to point out the tiny error to me, for example. I'm far from an expert, and I do find this is probably the biggest weakness of the whole story for me. Well, two weaknesses, really. One is that there are extraordinarily high quality videos that capture this phenomenon, and I always find that deeply suspicious. And the second is the reliance on external experts who I don't know to what extent I can trust their judgment.
That is always the problem, of course. Experts and crystal clear footage often do get in the way of the truth, as you and I both know.
Mm.
It can dirty that pool somewhat, which is a shame. Um, it is. I see where that would raise skepticism in an individual like you, of course, Rick, who searches for certainty, I suppose, before he decides to go all in on a myth.
I have to stand by my own standards. I'm afraid, Dickie. I wish I could be flexible on some of them, but my standards, they are immutable.
You are a man of standards. It's what your last girlfriend said, of course.
Yes, and no doubt what my next will say as well.
Um, did you see that footage of? I don't know how you would take it because it was one of the clearer pieces of footage, but it was of two dancers, and it appeared at one point that the two reflections looked at each other, shared a brief glance. Did you see that image? Yeah.
I did actually review that one, um, and once again, there is this sense in me that when you see something like that, that is so obvious, it's like, of course, this is it. This is exactly what we've always been looking for. This is the proof that will blow open this particular story. Something in my brain immediately says that's too easy. That at no point did I have to dig through ancient manuscripts or review things individual pixel by individual pixel. It's a subtle effect, of course. These things often are, but it did scream out to me as being the answer, and I always find it hard to accept that in such a way. It is a beautiful piece of video, however, and I urge anyone to see it. I also reviewed that rather remarkable footage of Darcy Bustle from when she was still with the Royal Ballet in
Hmm.
her rehearsals.
Of course,
Um,
famous
and
footage, wonderful.
it's outstanding footage with a very very clear reflection of her, filmed I think by a television news crew who were doing an interview with her. Um, and I must have reviewed that footage of Ms. Bustle for tens of hours at least. It may even have been more than that. And and I certainly got a great deal out of it.
I did hear that your neighbours were unable to buy man-sized tissues from the corner shop for a few weeks after.
Which, let's face it, is a conspiracy that we touched on last time.
It certainly was. It was a splendid conspiracy, that one. And would certainly explain the shortage, as you say. That's a very good point. Um, what do you say though to the? There's a dueling theory, of course, that's come up from this in the wider foraging world, as it were, among those that we listen to and others that we don't trust so
Mhm.
much. That it's not a reflection, but it is in fact that dance clubs, dance studios, actually have um, twice the number of students performing, um, and that instead of mirrors, it is actually the other dancers, and they're sort of keeping them there as a tax dodge, I suppose, to make more money from the membership without having to pay more.
I have certainly heard that it could be a tax dodge. I know that one of the um, groups in Canada, the rather alarmist Klondike group, does have an an idea that the reason that certain forms of dance, particularly ballet, are relatively exclusive is because duplicates are raised to be lifelong organ donors for their sibling, their virtual sibling. Um, I I suppose there is a point where we all look at this and say, is this theory now becoming so convoluted that it is impossible to delve any further without slipping into an endless spaghetti of ideas that could go nowhere? And clearly we are nowhere near that point with this one. There is plenty more to investigate.
Indeed. Sock Fiddler, in fact, made a statement, and I don't know, as someone that spent a lot of time watching the Darcy Bustle footage and everything around it, you may know more. Sock Fiddler says, when asked what prompted her retirement, Dame Darcy is rumoured to have glanced at a covered up mirror and whisper, "She told me to." Is this something that you've heard before? Is this
I
just
haven't actually
malicious
heard that
rumours?
specific rumor about retirement, but I certainly have heard many times people refer to dancers, including Miss Bustle, about the way they do refer to themselves, often in the third person, and if there's a mirror presence, definitely glance at it at the time.
Mm. It's definitely an interesting point, and I think you're right. It's such a wide tale that with many options. It's just it feels like something that you could get lost in and lose years of your life looking at. And I'm sure you've already said that you were looking at next year spending an entire year going back to the Darcy Bustle footage and spending a lot of time poring over that again.
I would very much like to set aside a year for that, and perhaps looking at other footage of her as well. I think I'm nowhere near getting to the bottom just of that relatively short amount I have, but I'm sure a dancer of her fame, there will be plenty of other footage out there.
Splendid. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. Um, People have said also, as well as it being twins, whether organ donors or not, others have hinted at something far more sinister. Of course, they would. People that have watched a lot of horror films would say that.
Hmm.
Would you say there is something more sinister about it? Where would you fall on this?
I think I'm. I don't know if you feel the same way actually, but in general, when we investigate almost anything, I always feel we haven't scraped the depths of quite how dark it could get, quite how brutal, quite how horrifying it could get. So honestly, we are um, with this and with many others still possibly flailing around in the happy shallows of what could be a very cold and dark ocean.
Uh, Many oceans are cold and dark, Rick, but it's up to people like us to bring warmth and light to such places. And so, speaking of which, um, I think it's time to look at our final thoughts on the Dancer's
Mm.
Reflection. Um, we could go many ways, of course, and in some ways, our believe or skeptical is a difficult question to ask because this one is not a black and white one and zero decision because there's a lot of things it could be. Um,
Mm.
but the dancer's reflection as being a reflection that is different to the dancer, that dances better, that has the different eyes, that um, makes a mistake if the dancer changes their routine or dances perfectly when the dancer makes a mistake, that
Mm.
seems to have a life or essence of its own, whether that is as a hidden twin for organ doning or as a replacement for a show or a tax dodge,
Mm.
or as something much more sinister and dark and evil, perhaps.
Yeah.
Um, do you believe, with all the footage you've seen, that there is something? in this that the reflection is indeed different to the dancer?
I I think there may be some element of us just scratching the surface in this case. But until then, I am afraid I have to remain in the skeptical camp, not because I don't think there's anything here, but because I don't think I can even see the edges of what it is yet.
I think that's a good stance, but it's almost a positive skeptical.
Hmm.
Something you want more. You're interested in more, Rick. You're a man that's thirsty always for more. I hear.
It is one of the things I'm known for. That and my absolute exacting standards.
Of course, and you'll be pleased to hear that I did this week actually take collection of 40 minutes of Darcy Bustle footage in training,
Oh wow.
which I'm planning to send to you early next week.
That would be fantastic, and if you could make it just a little bit quicker, that would be even better.
So of course. As for me, you know me, Rick. I'm more easily won over by such wonderful tales, and I believe, I think there is something, and I think we're looking at it in the same way, just with a different mindset.
Hmm.
I believe there is something in it. I wish that I could give more time to it. I think it's a huge, huge mystery, but to my mindset, there is something there. The reflection is not the woman or the man. What it is, I do not know, but I believe in something. And it appears that chat is along the same line as me. Sock Fiddler, Realm of Russ, and Already Half Spiced. Good evening, Already Half Spiced, by the way. Um, all believe.
I'm actually quite cheered up by that. I feel it is encouraging that people are so open minded. Um, it's I'm aware that, like all of us, I have limitations in this area, but I have to stand by the standards that I've set myself. You do understand.
Of course, and you're a man with exacting standards, quite frankly.
Exacting.
Exact, exacting. We're glad, legitimate, that you've had a wonderful evening with some friends who's doing ordinary stuff. For truth foragers like ourselves and you, we can't snuffle for truth truffles 24/7. It's important to spend some time with friends, doing ordinary things like poring over ancient manuscripts. I find nothing more relaxing.
Mm.
Looking at old surveillance footage. Do you remember all those hours we've spent supping on beers and just chilling out, watching old surveillance footage of supermarkets? It's a very relaxing, normal thing to do with friends of an evening.
Absolutely. I mean, if you are, especially when you're doing something, as we were doing on that occasion, um, counting the patterns and numbers of supermarket trolleys in their various locations,
Mm.
it's very easy to lose count and make a mistake. It's very important to have someone counting them with you.
I really was looking forward to those Friday nights for that couple of months. They were time well spent.
They were, yes, and revealed well, some tantalizing leads, shall we say?
Oh, maybe one day we'll return to it with those watching. But it is not our final mystery for this evening, unfortunately, for we have something much closer to home. As always, we like to finish one of our episodes here with a local myth or legend. Rick, why don't you tell the watchers what local means to us?
In much as I'm sure we would love to consider ourselves citizens not only of the world but of this plane of existence, um, we we would probably limit our local reach to the area of at least the county of Kent and maybe the extent of southeast London. Certainly, ideally, an area perhaps even a little smaller than that.
Absolutely. And that is something we are doing with this final mystery. It's something that's been around for a while. It's focused on something that is a well-known historical artifact in Kent, and for Londoners that used to come to Kent every summer, Rick,
Hmm.
it is the mystery of the Hopper's Hut.
Yes. So that those who don't know, the um, during the harvest time for the hop crop, as in the sort of leafy bud that you use to flavour beer, um, which was and remains a very important cash crop in Kent. Large numbers of people, mostly from South London, would travel down to help with the harvest, and they would treat it like a family holiday, wouldn't they? They would come down with their families, and they would all um, do enjoy the fresh air and the countryside and have a lovely time, even though it was a working trip. They would also be paid for their labor. um, there is a on many of these farms, they put up accommodation for these hoppers to stay in when they were down on the farms. And growing up in this area, you've known about this story your whole life. Of course, you've known what they were, which is why I actually found it particularly frustrating that I caught no wind of this story at all until you brought it to my attention.
It's a strange one in that regard. It was, as you say, that all these families would come down from London, would have a wonderful summer. They'd take their summer holidays from their other jobs and such like, and come out to get some air, get some nature away from the big smoke, especially as it was then,
Mm,
and have that. It was hard work, of course, Rick, and they all stayed on site in these hoppers' huts,
mm,
and would finish at the end of the summer with a big celebration, which places like Faversham continues with the Hop Festival and the Pearly Kings and Queens Parade, and
mm.
there would be the king of the harvest and the queen, but they'd always switch. So the man would be the queen and a woman would be the king. It was sort of like a historical in joke, a tradition, as it were. It was a big thing, and
Indeed.
this was why it did surprise me that you had never heard of this very fascinating myth before.
Yes, it was. I, it was when you mentioned it to me as if I must already know it. Because of the length of time I've lived in this area and the researches I've done, and it, I think in my brain assumed the same. So as you started to sort of say, "Oh well, of course you know about that one," my brain was saying, "Well, obviously I must," and then I realised I had no idea what you were talking about.
Um, the Hopper's Hut was a small hut and would mainly consist of a couple of beds, maybe one on a frame if you're lucky for a father and mother, and then another on the ground for any children, which was literally straw in a roughly hewn cover if you were lucky,
Hmm.
and there was often a lot of insects and such like in there. There would be a fire, which was very important, even in the summer in the evenings, and you might have a small cupboard for food, and maybe a table, and that was it. The idea was that the family would stay for those 3 summer months um, in very basic accommodation, but would spend a lot of time out. The days were long. The harvest days were long.
Hmm.
They would drink fine Kentish ales.
Hmm.
They would have a lot of singing, dancing, and such like, and then, when needed, would return to the hut mostly to sleep and to prepare a meal. And this is why it was. There's so many tales of this that the first mentions of them, some families leaving their hut in the morning and going through the door and finding themselves back in on their London street. Incredible. And I'm amazed that you've never heard of this before, because there is at least a dozen circumstances to this.
Of course. I mean, once you mentioned it to me, and I went looking, it leapt out at me. Things that I suppose uh, books I actually owned, references I had used. It turns out I'd overlooked or minimized the importance of these references. I think sometimes it can be easier to overlook things when they are local to you. I do believe you can undervalue the things you are most familiar with. Um, and I failed to see it. I failed to see the pattern. I made the absolute beginner mistake with one of them of assuming that the description was entirely figurative. That, you
Of
know,
course.
one day I was stepping out of the hut and back to my street in London, and of course you think, well, of course they're cutting out the journey, but
Yes, of
obviously they
course.
weren't. Um, yes, it is an interesting thing, and when you start looking into it, of course, that's where the again the mathematics starts to line up, because it turns out that the area of London that all of these people emerged from was Whitechapel, a relatively small part of the city, and you know huge numbers of the hoppers came from all over the city, but particularly the east and southeast of the city. But for some reason, this particular myth only relates to those who came down to the country from Whitechapel. I don't know why that is specifically. Um, Obviously, as I'm sure you know, there are lurid suggestions that this is related in some way to the predations of Jack the Ripper, that perhaps he was able to evade capture by stepping through the right front door in Whitechapel and emerging from a hut in a field in Kent, where he could ride out any pursuit without fear of being caught. Um, but I don't know what you think about that.
It's a it's a very interesting connection, I would say, and it seemed very much that that link between Whitechapel was a link to one specific farm on Kent. That every one of these dozen or so um, families that were mentioned, you have to assume there's many more, of course.
Mm.
You'd assume only 10% were mentioned. I would assume over 100 families probably came and went at that time.
Yes, I think that's well, truthfully, probably a minimum expectation. Yes.
Yeah, that's the sort of numbers that you and I usually work on in such situations. The fact that you had this almost a portal between Whitechapel and this one farm in Kent was fascinating. And I think for me, I loved I must say, going back slightly, the idea that people thought that there was poetry, the missing out of the journey
Mm.
in descriptions, the poetry of I left the house, I went through the door and I was home. And I think at the time
Yeah.
people would say that's a wonderful way of putting it. You've had a wonderful summer,
Yeah.
and it's the excitement of the journey down. There's much less excitement heading back to London. So the poetry of the suddenness of I'm in this heaven of the Garden of England, and then back in Whitechapel. And so I can see why many people, you included, miss that.
It only really becomes obvious when you visit Whitechapel yourself, of course, and you realise that this is not a place that poetry really should be used to describe. It is not a poetic sort of place.
Maybe a limerick.
That's very much more the oeuvre. Yes.
Um, I think there are some interesting points. You mentioned Jack the Ripper, and there are some interesting points with with Jack and comings and goings. because for the most part, there were no returns. Because there are, and we will get into it about the talk of people coming out of the hut, and that is something that we must touch on, I think, because that ties into the potential of the escape, an escaping Jack, or people suddenly finding themselves in Kent, as we've found documentation in diaries. But for me, the other thing I'd like to bring to the table is that the people that went into the hut after no one left it, in Kent because they found themselves back at Whitechapel, there were strange, in their place were strange, almost like stick dolls of the family,
Yes,
just left in on the beds, as if their souls had left, but they left something behind.
it is. It is one of those things where you find that increasingly compelling the more you consider it, because instead of something where a fleeting glimpse is caught and can easily be missed,
Mm.
these are objects that people could find, see, handle, and describe in detail. There are sketches of some of them in the accounts. I don't think any of the originals have actually survived, though there is an interesting piece that might be one of them saved in the archive of the local heritage museum in Faversham, but I haven't been able to confirm it is an original piece.
It's a fascinating
Um,
piece, though.
it is, and if you look at it, you immediately think there is something extremely unusual going on here.
Was
It's
there? Was there? Sorry, I was just going to ask. Was there? Um, um, the families that left were the figures similar to the family? Did they were any? Is there records of the families seeing these dolls, being asked if they'd made them?
As far as I'm aware, there is no record of anybody following up with the families,
Hmm.
but there is certainly a sense that the figures left behind were definitely representative, in rough form, of course, of the family that had stayed in the hut. And obviously, people would naturally assume that the children of that particular family had made them in the evenings, and left them behind when they left as a little memento of their visit. But uh, I find that argument lacks rigor, to be honest, because these figures only appear to turn up in cases where we know the family did, in fact, disappear without taking the customary routes back, traveling back with people they'd holidayed with. That there is no record of their movement, and in many cases they then left written records in which they use this allegedly poetic language to describe the way they came home. And no, it is it is important when there is real physical evidence left behind like this to take it very seriously indeed.
Was you looked a lot at patterns? You're a man of patterns. It's
I
well
am.
known. It's well known. It's well known. Those that watch regularly will know that Rick is a man who focuses very heavily on looking for connections between things. As he's a splendid snuffler in that regard.
Hmm.
Um, did you find any connections between circumstances of uh, the hut or the family or the dates or the circumstances behind them finding themselves back in Whitechapel? Or
Yes, many, in fact, perhaps too many even to begin ruling them out. There are patterns in the dates, patterns in the ages of the children, patterns in the exact location of where they lived in Whitechapel. It appears, for example, that you have to live within about 100 meters of Mitre Square, but not
mm,
in Mitre Square, which is a remarkable thing, I find. There is a sense that you have to have a front door that faces directly onto the street. in Whitechapel. Every single person has that, but you cannot have exclusive ownership of the property. You have to be sharing it with another family or live upstairs in it, some way subdivided. Um, these are these are two remarkable coincidences to be dismissed, I feel.
Indeed, and those that walked out of their Hopper's Hut door and found themselves on the Whitechapel street, um, there's no records of any of them. That there's diary records of what they do next, and everyone that returns through their door to try and find, see if they go back to the Hopper's Hut or not. Every single record, I believe, suggests they just found themselves in their Whitechapel home.
Exactly. And it is notable that despite the fact many families would travel down to become hoppers year after year for the harvest, there is no record of a family that ever experienced this phenomenon ever traveling out to the country again to do this.
Mm.
One paranormal trip back home between the sort of inside and outside of a single door is apparently enough for them, and they don't want to risk it again. I did, of course, try to uncover whether or not they'd all stayed in the same block of huts in the same room, perhaps.
Hmm.
It's hard to uncover that now because it appears that those buildings have been long destroyed, though people have pointed out where the footings were. But I did notice one thing that struck me as peculiar. Uh, it's not absolutely certain which block it was, but what I think is probably the strongest candidate. Um, that block consisted of a line of six
Hmm.
huts formed into a sort of a long single structure. And there is considerable evidence that the one third in from the western end was actually destroyed, taken apart, and destroyed, leaving a gap, so that there was instead a set of two, and then a short gap, and a set of three huts. And this appeared to happen um, many decades before the rest of the structure was destroyed. And I cannot shake the feeling that the reason for this was deliberately to remove a space that had been suspected of having this particular phenomenon. I don't know if they knew what happened to the people who disappeared, but if that was a single shared family room where a family had been staying, and one morning you find that they've gone and all that are left are these stick figures. This is a time before people had telephones and things like that,
Mm.
so it wasn't as if you could easily call them and find out if they were okay. I think the farm's owners may have quietly decided to just demolish that hut, um, so as to so as to stop the thing happening anymore. Though we do have to record, of course, that while the numbers of incidents do drop off, they don't actually go away at that point. It does appear that if that was the one place it was happening, it shifted afterwards.
That is very true. You do see it the 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 records of which hut does dissipate somewhat among other huts after, although it was focused on one for a while. Did you see the story of the hut after it had been destroyed? That the farmer's dog um, found a corner there, found a remnant of one of the mattresses, and fell asleep on it, and the farmer never saw the dog again.
I I did hear that. Obviously, disappearing dogs are a sort of separate phenomenon in their own right,
Mm.
and it's
Of
too
course,
easy,
it's very very common, very
very very common. I also found references to the fact that when that entire row of houses was destroyed, they did find a small number of human bones
common.
underneath. But
Mm.
again, we're talking about a very old piece of countryside. Human bones are not all that uncommon.
No, that is very true, especially in that part of the country, of course. Um, you mentioned it before, and I don't know how much you want to delve into it now. Of course, it's very much a parallel tale as opposed to central to this mystery. But was there ever eyewitness reports of Jack the Ripper in Kentish Fields, suggesting that he had managed to jump in the other direction, or is that all hearsay?
Well, for a long time, I believed it was entirely hearsay, of course, because it's one of those things where it's too convenient. It's like when somebody tells you they've gone back in their past life and they turned out to be Cleopatra. You know,
Of course, everyone's
yeah,
Cleopatra or Alexander the Great's eunuch or something like that.
exactly, yes. And so when you hear those kind of references, you do think it is unlikely. Um, however, um, there are a great many stories of a very tall, skeletally thin man wearing a top hat, a smart suit, and carrying a surgeon's bag, striding across the fields in that time. And truthfully, you wouldn't expect an unknown surgeon to be walking the fields um, of a farm at that point. It would normally be a local doctor who was called out. Um, so it is one of those things where yes, there are sightings. They do get recorded because they were unusual enough at the time to be noted, but inconclusive, I would say for that.
I think that's a very fair point. I think that's people with a sense of romanticism and wanting to make a story a bigger thing, I guess, and combine two things together into something a bit too easily, I suppose, putting a bow on it. Whereas you and I both know that in the world of snuffling for those truth truffles, for looking for the truth behind mysteries, things are they rarely arrive neatly packaged with a bow.
Yes, it is just like the fact that grainy footage is often a mark of authenticity. Occam's razor is often a trap. Something that seems like the simplest, most logical, most connected solution is often simply an indication that you simply haven't dug deep enough, looked far enough, or thought out of the box enough.
Indeed, indeed. You're a man with much wisdom. Your book on your wise sayings. You're looking to release that on Amazon soon, aren't you?
I I think I think I will probably release it on Amazon. I'm a little bit concerned about doing so, obviously, because as we know, enterprises, companies, people, and other entities named after rivers have a traditional association
Of course, of
with
course.
all sorts of horrendous things.
Mm.
Um, but nonetheless, I think I probably will put it there because ultimately accessibility is more important than the fear of the various jumping devils.
If you've just never got over uh, your Nile Rodgers research, have you?
It was nightmare stuff. Nightmare stuff.
So anyway, back to the task at hand. The Hopper's Hut, Rick, as a concept of London hoppers, families heading back into the hut for night, spending the night opening the door the next morning and finding themselves back in Whitechapel, having not made the transport in any way, shape, or form. This strange phenomenon of the twig, the wooden figures left behind.
Mm.
Um, are you a believer or do you remain skeptical?
I think in this case, the the obvious truth speaks loudly because there is no way for these individuals to have not realized what happened to them. They must have understood what happened. They they all survived. There were eyewitnesses. There were people who, this isn't something where somebody just disappeared and was never seen again. These people went on to live full lives, and accordingly, the evidence, I think, is absolutely incontrovertible. And when you see that there is also physical evidence, there is anecdotal evidence locally, yes, I believe.
I believe. So I put the short bit. You can't hear it, of course, Rick, but there was some exciting music at that point. You believe. Um, I'm the same as you. For me, of everything we've looked at tonight, and perhaps in all of our episodes, for me, this is the one I truly believe in.
Mm,
I've been to Hoppers Huts. There's a few left standing at the Kent Life Museum and some other places, and even those have a feeling about them that is hard to shake. The as you say, the so many families, those at least those dozen families that all went on to live lives that recorded it, is just it just I can't not believe in it. I can't shake it.
mm.
For me, I believe it, and it's funny for me because if you look in chat, although already half spliced believes, Sock Fiddler and Russ are both skeptical still. Sock Fiddler suggests that in the economy people make a fortune. Yeah, maybe they'd see it as a cheap transport, which I totally get. You know, you pay here, pay a thrupney, pay a few shillings, and we'll get you home, so you don't need to take a pay this for horse and cart for a day's worth of journey or something. She
I
has
mean,
a
it
point.
is a valid point, though. I would point out that I think we both, when we realised that there was a connection to the early growth of the railway system, where people were saying how remarkable it was that you could get from the Kent countryside to London in the blink of an eye, and used that to advertise the power of the railways, given that we've both been on railways and they really aren't all that remarkably efficient. So, so that is definitely something I think has been exploited in the past.
It's true. It is true. But I think, but in both of our viewpoints, not in this case.
Not in this case.
Um, well, Rick, we've looked at three more urban myths and mysteries this evening, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. I've very much enjoyed your input, your insight. Um, you've really brought a lot of wisdom and research as always this evening.
I have enjoyed yours as well, and I must confess I am deeply indebted to you for bringing the Hopper's Hut to my attention, because I I still cannot believe I missed it.
Uh, I'm glad that you've seen it. Um, these things happen. These things pass us by sometimes. We can't be expected to be at the forefront of everything. We can get lost in certain matters for long periods of time and miss things. The time you
Mm.
spent um, staring at the footage of Darcy Bustle was when I was first looking at the Hopper's Hut. So we can see how it was missed.
And thank you, Sock Fiddler. I will do as Philomena suggests. Yes, thank you very much, Dickie. It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you to all of our listeners. We know that almost all of you are people in every literal sense. That's why we are so careful with who we broadcast to.
Mm.
Um, and I like the fact that you can be reassured that so few of those who might be listening in are inhuman.
We take it very seriously, the humanity of those watching, the
Mm.
trustworthiness. We need to give one final thank you, which is to the Boys from the Baltic staff for allowing us to take over their channel for this evening, as we've done a few times now. One thing we are required to do, one of the notes that was left for me, was to quickly put up an advertisement for their convention that is happening next year in Faversham, local to us, in fact. Maybe we'll run into them. That'd be very
That would be very fascinating. We could even um, point out some of the local paranormal hotspots.
maybe they'll enjoy a drink to look for the distinguished gentleman, perhaps.
Perhaps that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? I wonder if we'll get a sighting by a visitor to the convention.
Oh, that would be
Yes.
splendid.
And as always, please remember that the opinions expressed here tonight are ours and not those of the boys from the Baltic Star.
Absolutely, very, very much so. That goes without saying, but I'm glad you said it anyway. So, if anyone is interested, it's the 16th and 17th of March. They appear to be role playing on the 16th, a mega game on the 17th, and hopefully they will join us. We'll speak to them. Hopefully, they'll join us maybe on the Friday night or Saturday evening to hunt out some of the local spots for paranormal happenings. It'll be
I think
fantastic.
that's going to be very exciting, and it's always nice to have an event like this convention in Faversham. I think we're going to look forward to it.
Well, and I hope that others will too. Thank you very much, dear viewers. Thank you very much, Rick. As always, an absolute treat. Please, all of you, enjoy the rest of your weekends. But most importantly, keep snuffling for those truth truffles and open your minds somewhat. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Good night.